You remember Three's Company as that light, goofy comedy. Bright apartments, big laughs, and one of the most iconic trios on television. But behind those laughs, things were falling apart. Before the show even aired, one network executive looked at the pilot and basically said, "This could ruin television." And in a way, he was right. Because what happened off-camera was far more shocking than anything you saw on screen. A sudden firing that blindsided fans. Co-stars who stopped speaking to each other, and a leading man pushing his body to the limit just to keep the show alive. If you thought you knew this show, you don't. Because these are 8 insane facts about Three's Company they never told you. Fact number 1. The show was straight up stolen from the British. Alright, fact number 1, and I want you to really sit with this one, because it's the kind of thing that makes you go, wait, seriously? Three's Company, the quintessential all-American California Sunshine sitcom, was not an American idea. Not even close. The whole thing, the concept, the setup, the guy lives with 2 girls and the landlord thinks he's gay premise, was lifted, legally and officially licensed, from a British sitcom called Man About the House, which aired on ITV starting in 1973. Now, lifted sounds harsh. Let me be more polite. It was adapted. Like how your grandmother adapts a recipe from a cookbook and then insists she invented it. It's adapted. We love her for it. Man About the House ran for 6 series. That's what the British call seasons, and yes, they are adorable for it. And it was a massive hit in the UK. The premise was almost identical. A man, Robin Tripp, moves in with 2 women, Chrissy and Joe, and they all convince the landlord he's not a threat by implying he's gay. American producers Don Nickel, Michael Ross, and Bernie West saw the show and thought, "We can do this!" So they bought the rights, rebuilt it from scratch for American audiences, and renamed it Three's Company. And here's what makes this even more interesting. The British version was actually a bit more grounded, a little more dry wit, a little less physical chaos. The American version turned the dial all the way up. More slapstick, more misunderstandings that snowball at the speed of light, more of Jack Tripper falling through doors and over furniture. Which, honestly, smart move. Because that translation, from British restraint to American chaos, is a huge part of why the show worked so well here. Before Three's Company became a ratings monster, before it made John Ritter a household name, before it became the show your parents argued about whether you were old enough to watch, it was a script, on a shelf, in London, that someone in Hollywood looked at and said, "Yeah, we're doing this." And they did. And 75 million Americans tuned in. But before all of that, there was a small apartment in Merton, England, and a show most Americans have never heard of. Fact number 2. The network almost killed it before it aired. Fact number 2. And this one is where the story gets a little tense, in a your grandfather yelling at the television kind of way. When ABC, the network that would eventually air Three's Company, first reviewed the pilot, the reaction inside those offices was not excitement. It was closer to panic. See, the show's core premise, a heterosexual man pretending to be gay so a landlord would let him live with 2 women, was considered wildly controversial for 1977. We're talking about a time when network television had very strict rules, very nervous advertisers, and very loud watchdog groups who had nothing better to do than count how many times someone raised an eyebrow suggestively on a Tuesday night. The American Family Association, and groups like it, were already sharpening their pencils before the show even aired. They saw the premise and immediately started organizing boycotts, writing letters, and generally doing what people did before they had social media. They made noise the old-fashioned way. And here's the thing, it almost worked. ABC was nervous. Sponsors were nervous. There was a real, documented moment where the show's future was genuinely in question, where the people holding the checkbook were asking whether this was a hill they wanted to die on. But the producers held firm. And ABC, to their credit, or maybe just their greed, honestly, business is business, looked at the test audience numbers and made a decision. The audiences loved it, overwhelmingly. So they aired it. Three's Company premiered on March 15, 1977, and by the end of its first season, it was already cracking the top 10. By season 2, it was the #1 show in America. #1, out of everything on television. The same show people tried to ban. The same show that made nervous executives sweat through their sport coats. Number 1. And here's the quiet irony that I personally love. The show's whole joke was built on a misunderstanding. Jack isn't gay. Everyone just thinks he is. And the entire controversy? Also built on a misunderstanding. The show wasn't promoting anything. It was making fun of assumptions. That was the joke. The people protesting it were basically living inside the punchline. Before Three's Company became a cultural landmark, it was a gamble that almost didn't get made. And the fact that it did, against that kind of pressure, says a lot about what happens when you believe in something worth fighting for. Fact number 3. John Ritter trained like an athlete to do that comedy. Fact number 3, and this one is my personal favorite, because if you've ever watched Jack Tripper fall over a couch, walk into a door, or somehow get tangled in his own legs while trying to look completely innocent, and thought, how does he do that without actually dying? I have your answer. John Ritter did not just stumble onto a set and wing it. The man worked for that. John Ritter's physical comedy was deeply, seriously studied. We're talking about a performer who went back and studied the silent film era. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd. These were men who built an entire art form out of their bodies before there was even sound to hide behind. Ritter watched their work obsessively. He broke down their techniques. He understood the mechanics of why a fall is funny versus why a fall is just a fall. And then he applied it. Precisely. Every stumble you see in Three's Company has architecture behind it. The timing, specifically how long he waits before the reaction hits, that's a craft. The facial expression mid-pratfall, where he somehow looks both surprised and resigned at the same time, that's not improvisation. That's rehearsal. His castmates talked about it constantly. Joyce DeWitt, who played Janet, said, and I'm paraphrasing here because that's what we do, that watching John work was like watching someone who was genuinely in control of every single muscle in his body, even when the character was supposed to be completely falling apart. And here's the part that adds some genuine weight to this. Performing that kind of physical comedy is hard on your body, full stop. The bruises are real. The impact is real. John Ritter did take after take of physical gags that would send most people straight to the chiropractor, which, at his age, sounds less like a job and more like a dare. But here's what makes it more impressive. He made it look effortless. And that's the real magic trick. The best physical comedy in the world is the kind where you forget someone chose to do it, where it just feels like this person is naturally a disaster, in the most lovable way possible. Jack Tripper was not an accident. He was a masterpiece, and John Ritter built him from the ground up, one bruised hip at a time. Before Three's Company became appointment television, John Ritter was in a rehearsal hall somewhere, watching a Charlie Chaplin film for the 40th time and taking notes. And honestly, God bless him for it. Fact number 4. The Ropers were so popular, they got their own show. Fact number 4. And this one is a love letter to every grumpy older couple on television, starting with the original. Stanley and Helen Roper, the landlords, the perpetual thorns in Jack Tripper's side. Stanley, played by Norman Fell, with his permanent scowl and his complete unwillingness to be impressed by anything. Helen, played by Audra Lindley, desperately trying to get Stanley to show any romantic interest while he perfected the art of ignoring her from the same couch. They were supposed to be background characters, landlord obstacles, the people who create the problem Jack has to charm his way out of. And then, something happened that the writers probably didn't fully plan for. America fell in love with them. Not just like them, fell in love. Viewers connected with Stanley and Helen in a way that caught everyone off guard. The comedy of their marriage, the running joke that Helen was basically begging for attention and Stanley was treating enthusiasm like a personal offense, it landed differently than anyone expected, because it was honest. Exaggerated, yes, this is a sitcom, not a documentary, but there was something recognizable in that dynamic that audiences responded to deeply. So the network made a decision. In 1979, after 3 seasons of Three's Company, Norman Fell and Audra Lindley were written out of the show. Their characters sold the building and moved on, and ABC gave them their own series, The Ropers. Now here's the honest truth. The Ropers didn't quite capture lightning in a bottle the way Three's Company did. It ran for 2 seasons and then quietly wrapped up. Part of what made The Ropers so great was contrast. They worked because they were reacting to Jack's madness. On their own, Without that chaos bouncing off them, the dynamic shifted. But the fact that they got a spin-off, that tells you everything. That tells you how much weight those two performers were carrying in what was supposed to be a supporting role. And here's the bittersweet piece of this. Stanley Roper was a character who barely said he loved his wife across 3 seasons of television. But Norman Fell, the man behind Stanley, was by all accounts one of the warmest, most generous performers on that set. The grumpy landlord was a costume. The man inside it was nothing like him. Before Three's Company proved you could build a whole show around secondary characters, Stanley Roper was just a man complaining about the rent. And America couldn't get enough. Fact number 5. Suzanne Somers asked for equal pay and got fired for it. Fact number 5. And I want you to take a breath here, because this one isn't funny. Well, some parts of it are, in that tragic kind of way. But mostly, this one is a story about what happens when a woman asks to be valued the same as the man standing next to her, and the answer is no. Suzanne Somers played Chrissy Snow, the bubbly, wide-eyed blonde who was as sweet as she was gloriously confused by the world around her. She was beloved. She was a cultural phenomenon. By the end of the 1970s, Suzanne Somers was not just a TV character, she was a brand, a name, a face that people genuinely recognized on the street. And then she looked at her paycheck, and looked at John Ritter's paycheck, and asked a very reasonable question. By season 5, John Ritter was earning somewhere in the range of $150,000 per episode, which in $1980 is the kind of money that makes your eyes water. Somers was earning significantly less. Significantly. She went to the producers and asked for $150,000 per episode to match what her co-star was making. Now, you can debate the behind-the-scenes details of salary negotiations all day long, but the basic fact is this. She was 1/3 of the show's title. She was on the poster. She was on the lunchboxes, the magazine covers, the workout posters. Yes, the Thighmaster era was still coming, but the fame was already there. She asked to be paid what she felt her value was worth. The producers said no. And then they did something that, even by 1980s Hollywood standards, was remarkably cold. They didn't negotiate. They didn't compromise. They reduced her to brief cameo appearances for the remainder of season 5. Chrissy would call in from her parents' house. Somers would deliver her lines over a speakerphone. And that was it. She was on her own show, appearing via telephone. And then they wrote her out entirely. Season 6 introduced Chrissy's cousin, Cindy Snow, played by Jenna Lee Harrison, and then eventually Terry Alden, played by Priscilla Barnes. The show kept going. Jack kept falling over furniture. The misunderstandings kept multiplying. But Chrissy Snow was gone. Here's the part that's quietly devastating. Joyce DeWitt, who played Janet Wood and had been Somers' on-screen best friend for 5 seasons, sided publicly with the producers in the dispute. The two women did not speak for over 20 years. 20 years! People have raised entire children in less time than that falling out lasted. They eventually reconciled. Somers appeared on a Three's Company reunion special in 2003, and by most accounts, she and DeWitt made peace. But the weight of what happened in those season 5 negotiations sat between them for 2 decades. Before Three's Company was remembered as a light-hearted comedy about apartment life, it was the backdrop for one of Hollywood's most documented pay equity battles. And Suzanne Somers, whatever you think of how she handled it, had the nerve to ask out loud for what she felt she deserved. That takes guts, even if it cost you the show. Fact number 6. The gay premise was groundbreaking and complicated at the same time. Fact number 6, and this one requires a little nuance, which I know is a big word for a YouTube video about a 1970s sitcom, but bear with me. Nuance just means we're going to look at 2 sides of the same coin at the same time. That's it. You can do it. The central premise of Three's Company, Jack pretends to be gay so the landlord won't object to him living with 2 women, is either a brilliant piece of social commentary or a lazy stereotype, depending entirely on when you're watching it and how you're thinking about it. Here's both sides. Honestly, the case for the premise. In 1977, putting a gay character, even a faked one, at the center of the most-watched show on American television was genuinely radical. The premise forced audiences to sit with a gay identity, even a performed fictional one, as the foundation of every single episode. It normalized the concept in a room where it had never been normalized before. Mr. Roper didn't object to gay people. That was the whole point. Jack being gay was the solution, not the problem. For millions of viewers who had never seen gay identity treated as anything other than shameful or scandalous on TV, there was something quietly subversive happening in that living room. The case against the premise. Jack's gay performance was built on exaggerated, stereotypical behavior. Limp wrists, high voices, dramatic gasps. The joke was always how convincingly Jack could perform a caricature. And a caricature, no matter how well-intentioned, is still a caricature. Many gay viewers at the time said, and said it loudly, that the show was laughing at a version of gay identity rather than laughing with it. The National Gay Task Force actually reached out to the show's producers before it aired and negotiated changes to how Jack's persona was portrayed, pushing back on some of the more extreme stereotyping. And the producers listened, at least partially. So, what do we do with all of that? We hold both things at once. We say, for its time, this show pushed into territory that American television had been actively avoiding. And simultaneously, the way it got there left real people feeling like the punchline. Both of those things are true. Neither cancels the other out. Three's Company was more thoughtful about this than it gets credit for, and less thoughtful than it should have been. That's basically the honest verdict. Before Three's Company became a nostalgia comfort watch, it was a cultural experiment happening in real time. And like most experiments, it got some things right and some things wrong. That's what makes it worth talking about. Fact number 7. John Ritter's death changed TV grief forever. Fact number 7, and I told you in the intro, this one changes things. I meant it. Now, John Ritter didn't pass away during Three's Company. I want to be clear about that. The show ended in 1984. Ritter went on to do 8 Simple Rules, multiple films, and a career that, honestly, just kept getting richer and more layered as he got older. But the reason fact number 7 belongs in this list, the reason it matters in the context of Three's Company specifically, is because of what his death revealed about who he really was, and why that changes the way you watch every single episode of that show. John Ritter died on September 11, 2003, his daughter's birthday, which is a heartbreak within a heartbreak. He collapsed on the set of 8 Simple Rules and passed away at Providence St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank. He was 54 years old. The cause was an aortic dissection. That's when the inner layer of the aorta, the main artery running out of your heart, tears. It is fast. It is devastating. And it often gives no warning. He had been at work that day, filming, laughing, doing what he did. When the news broke, something happened in Hollywood that doesn't happen very often. The industry stopped. Not in a press release way, not in a "we offer our condolences" corporate statement way. People stopped. Co-workers wept on camera. Castmates from shows he'd done 20 years earlier called into radio stations and television programs just to talk about him. The tributes were immediate and personal and specific in a way that tells you the grief was real. Because here's what everyone who ever worked with John Ritter said. Consistently, across decades, across every show and every cast, he was kind. Genuinely, completely, consistently kind. On a set that could easily breed ego and competition, John Ritter was the guy who learned every crew member's name, who remembered your kid's birthday, who gave young actors more time and more patience than anyone was required to give them. The physical comedy was the gift he gave the audience. The kindness was the gift he gave everyone else. And when you go back and watch Three's Company now, when you watch Jack Tripper stumble and charm and fall and recover, you're watching a man who was, by every account, doing the same thing off camera, finding the lightness, finding the laugh, making the room better just by being in it. That's not a character, that's a person. Before John Ritter became a legend, he was just a remarkably decent human being who happened to be funnier than almost anyone alive. And that combination, the talent and the character behind it, is rarer than we admit. Go back and watch Three's Company knowing that. I promise, it hits different. Fact number 8. The show's final episode was one of the quietest endings in sitcom history. Fact number 8. And we're going to end where the show ended. Quietly, honestly, and a little bittersweet. On September 18, 1984, Three's Company aired its final episode. The episode was called Friends and Lovers, And by that point, the cast was barely the same group of people who had started the show 7 years earlier. Suzanne Somers was long gone. Norman Fell and Audra Lindley had departed to do the Ropers and then returned to the world of regular people. Mr. Furley, played by Don Knotts, who replaced the Ropers as the new landlord in Season 4, and was an absolute delight in that role for the record, was still there. Joyce DeWitt was there. And John Ritter, who had held this show together with sheer force of charm and physical genius for 7 years, was there. And they went out quietly. There was no big send-off, no massive finale event, no very special episode with a live studio audience weeping and a clip package of every memorable moment. In the final episode, Jack Tripper, the man who had fumbled and faked and sweet-talked his way through 7 seasons, finally said, "I love you," to Vicky Bradford, his long-running love interest, and the two of them got engaged. That was it. That was the ending. And honestly, for a show that was built on noise and slapstick and misunderstanding, a show that ran on the fuel of nothing ever being resolved cleanly, ending with something as simple and genuine as "I love you" was actually kind of perfect. A little like, okay, the bit's done. The character got the thing he was always chasing underneath all the chaos. A real connection. The ratings for the final season had dipped. The chemistry had shifted over the years as cast members came and went. The show knew it was winding down, and rather than overstay its welcome or manufacture drama, it simply ended. Three's Company ran for 174 episodes across 7 seasons. It was the #1 show in America for 2 of those seasons. It launched careers, sparked national conversations, and made a generation of Americans genuinely consider whether their landlord needed to know everything about their personal life. It gave us Jack Tripper. It gave us Janet Wood. It gave us Stanley Roper, sighing into his newspaper like a man who had given up on joy as a philosophical concept. It gave us a show that was sillier than it had any right to be, and more meaningful than most people gave it credit for. And then it said goodnight, gently, without much fanfare, and let the credits roll. Before Three's Company became the show you rewatch on a rainy Sunday when you need to feel good about the world, it was a risk, a fight, a controversy, a battle over money, a masterclass in physical comedy, and a genuinely warm piece of television history. Not bad for an idea that came from a small apartment in England. Here's something that kind of gets me. You just spent real time here, learning the real story behind one of the most watched shows in television history. And most people watching this won't subscribe. Not because they don't care, because they forget. Because they click away and find the next thing. And this channel just disappears into the algorithm. And that bothers me. Because what we're building here, show by show, story by story, is a record. A real one. The kind of TV history that doesn't get taught anywhere. If that matters to you, subscribe. Not for me. For the next video that you'll actually want to see, but won't. Because nobody told you it existed. Be the 1% who actually stays. Three's Company wasn't just a sitcom about a man faking his identity to split the rent. It was a launching pad, disguised as a comedy. A cultural flashpoint, wrapped in a laugh track. A show that survived network cold feet, pay wars, cast replacements, and national controversy, and still found a way to make you laugh until your face hurt. Some, like John Ritter, used Three's Company as the foundation for a career defined by warmth, precision, and a kind of physical genius you genuinely can't teach. Others, like Suzanne Somers, walked away from it, or were pushed, and built something entirely new on the other side. Norman Fell and Audra Lindley turned a landlord couple into a cultural institution. Don Knotts slid into a show mid-run and made it feel like he'd always been there. Joyce DeWitt anchored the whole thing with a groundedness that never got nearly enough credit. The show ran from 1977 to 1984. 7 seasons, 174 episodes. And it changed what an American sitcom could get away with talking about, and who it could put at the center of that conversation. The next time you sit down and watch Three's Company, I want you to pay attention to something you might have missed before. Not the jokes, you know those. I mean, the work. Watch the precision in John Ritter's timing. Watch the patience in Joyce DeWitt's reaction shots. Watch Norman Fell deliver a line so flat and so dry that you don't realize it's funny until 3 seconds after it's over. There's a lot happening in that apartment on Three's Company. A lot more than anyone thought. And now, you know. And that, 7 seasons, 1 borrowed premise, and more drama off-screen than on it, is the real story of Three's Company. Now here's the thing. If you thought the behind-the-scenes chaos of Three's Company was something, I need you to brace yourself. Because we're going somewhere that makes all of this look organized. The next video is 8 insane facts you never knew about Friends. And I promise you, fact number 3 alone is worth the click. Because it turns out, the monkey was a nightmare. Not a difficult-to-work-with nightmare, a full, documented, production-halting, cast-wide complaints nightmare. Marcel the monkey was... I don't even want to spoil it. Just click. It's right there. Go.